Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Recycled Content, a podcast of the Association of Plastic Recyclers, an international nonprofit and the only North American organization focused exclusively on improving recycling for plastics. I'm Kara Pochiro, and I'll be your host today. Last August, Resource Recycling featured an article by APR President and CEO Steve Alexander that dismantled the myth that plastic recycling is constrained by limited capacity. In fact, a recent study shows North American recyclers could process 1.7 billion more pounds of plastic each year on top of the 5 billion they already handle, enough to keep nearly 480 truckloads of plastic out of landfills every day. The infrastructure is already built, and the real constraint isn't technology, it's economics. Recyclers need steady material supply and stronger demand for recycled content. And as Steve stated, the capacity is there, the recyclers are ready. A wide variety of challenges and hurdles remain, but the future of recycling plastics isn't all doom and gloom. It's a wake-up call. Every part of the system has a role in unlocking this potential. We'll talk more about the challenges we face heading into 2026 and what APR is going to address them on the podcast today. Steve Alexander is a regular guest, but let me briefly introduce him again. He's led APR since 2005, guiding major growth in our programs, membership, and also our staff. Before joining APR, he spent over 20 years representing corporate and association clients at the federal and state levels, including a decade with Eastman Kodak focused on environmental and technology issues. That experience positions him well to continue expanding APR and strengthening the tools and resources that help companies design recyclable packaging, drive innovation, and support stable markets for post-consumer recycled content. Welcome back, Steve, and thanks for joining us today.
Well, it's always a pleasure. Thank you very much, and thanks for doing this. Greatly appreciate it.
Let's start with the myth of capacity shortage. As I mentioned, a recent study shows North American recyclers could process 1.7 billion more pounds of plastic each year on top of that 5 billion they already handle. And you can find this report on the APR website about capacity. But tell us more about existing capacity and what the real issues here are.
Very simply, the issue is market demand. We know, as I've indicated and as the study indicated, that we have ample capacity to recycle almost 2 billion more pounds of material a year than we do. We recycle 5 billion pounds of material as it is right now. Basically the equivalent of almost 518 wheelers going into a landfill on an everyday basis. The reality is recyclers have the capacity to recycle 40% more material if, in fact, they can just get the material. Now, we can't recycle what is not made available to us to recycle. The narrative, though, that exists out there is, we're losing capacity because you see some plants that are shutting wash lines or actually some plants actually closing recently. We've had a couple of announcements of PET facilities closing. Well, they're closing because they don't have any customers. And we need a greater market for the material for plastics recycling. You somehow have to incentivize consumer brand companies to recognize the value of using more recycled material that is domestically produced. And so while people might say these headlines, we're losing capacity, we still have ample capacity to produce more than 40% plastics recycling than we do today. We don't need government funding. We don't need government grants, et cetera. If we have customers, we'll invest in the plants and expansion on our own. The analogy I use is, you look at the electric vehicle industry right now, there was a government incentive for people to utilize and purchase electric vehicles. Now, what's happened? So the incentive went away, sales have plummeted. Well, there's never been an incentive ever for plastic recyclers to manufacture recycled material or for brand companies in the market to use recycled material. So we need to create market demand, and we need to incentivize that market demand through government levers and government policies. I mean, we talk about EPR legislation. We talk about companies having to pay fees in order to have their material collected and what have you. But without a market for that material, the only thing we're going to end up with run up a hell of a lot more material with nowhere for it to go. When you look at what's going on now, the big issue is we're dealing with a lack of demand for domestically produced recycled material. Obviously, the consumer brain comes and say, well, we're still using it, but we're getting it from overseas because it's much less expensive. Well, yes, that may be true, but you don't know, A, you can't certify what that product is. Secondly, really, do we want to rely on material that's produced in countries that may not have the environmental oversight or the labor laws that the United States does going forward? And it's all about bringing manufacturing back to the United States, right? It's all part and parcel of what this administration is doing. So the point really comes down to we need to grow the domestic manufacturing space. And let me be clear, by domestic, we mean North America. The United States, Canada, Mexico, we consider that one market because we all know material flows back and forth sometimes 3-4 times before it ends up in a final product. There are a lot of issues out there, but the number one issue that we have to deal with is the market demand for material, for domestically produced material, and for North American recyclers. Because the challenges that we face with low virgin prices, overproduction of virgin material, expansion of capacity to produce even more virgin material, and lack of markets for the recycled material we have is actually working against everything that we're trying to achieve. As I like to say a lot relative to APR, APR has solved every technical problem out there relative to can your package or product be recyclable? Our technical programs are globally recognized. And so if there's an innovation or a new type of product or a new cap or a new label or a new adhesive or a new barrier layer, and it's causing it, we solve those issues all the time. So there's no technical challenges per se to using recycled material. The challenges are the markets. And so we need customers. It's as simple as that. And our goal in 2026 is to focus on how do we incentivize the market to use domestically sourced recycled product.
So yes, those are certainly a lot of challenges that you just talked about, Steve. And another one is the persistent narrative that recycling doesn't work. We know plastic recycling works when the system works with it. Greenpeace recently released yet another report bashing plastic recycling. It's called Plastic Merchants of Myth. Circular Claims Fall Flat. And in this report, they include a series of statements that they claim are false. So let's quickly walk through just a couple of these, Steve. First, they claim that recycled content does not reduce plastic waste and pollution. So tell us about some of the environmental benefits of using recycled content.
Well, I think it's unfortunate narrative that they somehow conflated the reduction in use of virgin plastic as something that doesn't work. The one thing that we know which does work on to create plastics being sustainable is the recycling component of it. You recycle more plastic. What does that mean? It means you use less plastic. So I'm a little confused at the narrative of saying recycling doesn't work. They should talk to the 35, 40,000 people who are employed by this industry in the United States and in North America who work every day at solving the challenges of recycling plastic. I also think that from an environmental standpoint, we know that using recycled material to produce a product uses upwards of 70 to 80% less energy as using virgin material. It reduces greenhouse gas emissions and it lowers the carbon footprint from the utilization of it. It's interesting that one thing that a consumer can do to physically participate in reducing their own carbon footprint, one of the biggest things is recycling their bottles and recycling their containers. So they can contribute to doing that simply by recycling. They may say that we know it works. We do it every day. We're the recyclers. Like I indicated earlier, we have 480 truckloads, almost 500 truckloads of fully loaded truckloads a day, avoiding landfills because of what we're doing today. And we can do 40% more if we just have the product to do it with. The most iconic container that is recyclable that consumers use is a water bottle. And yet somehow we only collect 3 of 10 of them. So we can't recycle what is not collected. To say recycling doesn't work is an erroneous statement. The fact of the matter is it works. And as you point out in your question, the system. Well, we need the system to work. If you think about our industry, there are 5 things that need to happen in order for a product to be completely recycled. It needs to be designed to be recycled, first and foremost. If it's not designed to recycle, it doesn't matter what else you do with it. Well, the APR Design Guide is recognized as the foremost authoritative document across the globe on how to design your product in order to be recyclable. Then the material is going to be collected. Then it's going to be able to be sorted. And APR has a sortation protocol, which helps determine what material will flow into the proper line and into the proper bale. Then it needs to be processed. And ultimately, you need a market. Well, industry can control 3 of those 5. We control the design, we can control the sortation, and we can control the processing. We've done all that. What can't we control? Where are the problems? We don't control the supply of material because we don't collect it. It's not our responsibility to collect it. As I indicated earlier, we have to have a market because the market monetizes the entire system. You don't have customers, then you have no money to fund the system. So it's as simple as that. So industry is doing its part, but we need more material collected, and then we need more customers. So the recycling components of it are actually working. It's the other system components that need to be reinforced to work with the recyclers to provide more recycling and reduce the use of virgin material, fossil fuels, and also reduce plastic waste that's going into landfills. We're ready to help. We're here every day. Get us more material.
The study also claims that the recyclable plastics that you put in your bin are not actually recycled. This is one that we hear all the time. And it's very frustrating. There's lots of numbers thrown out there that people really misunderstand. We hear only 9% of plastic gets recycled, only 5%. Sometimes people think that 9% and that 5% refer to what you put in your bin. So walk us through some of these numbers and how we do know that the vast majority of what you put in your bin, if they are recyclable plastics, actually get recycled.
First of all, at least 70% of what you put in your bin ultimately ends up getting recycled. And those that don't get recycled, by and large, have some sort of contamination in it. It could be a non-recyclable container. It could be a container with a wrong label, etc. Things that make the material non-recyclable. You know, the numbers are frustrating. The fact of the matter is when people say 9% of plastics get recycled, they're conflating plastics that were never made to be recycled. They've got all the plastic that's out there that is manufactured. But the plastic that people really talk about is plastics that's in consumer packaging. That's really where the issue is. And less than half of the plastics that are generated go into consumer packaging, about 45%. When you look at that and you say, well, you know, our recycling rate is, quote, 9%. Well, when you double that, even more than that, because your denominator is really only 45% total. Yeah, it brings it up to 19 or 20%. We recognize we want to do more. That's not great. As I've indicated, we need more supply. We need better collection programs. We need more consistent programs across the country. There's 15,000 communities in this country. There are 9,000 recycling programs. Everybody takes something different. You know, my community takes polypropylene, high density, and PET. The community next to me takes PET and high density, no polypropylene, but they take plastic bags. There's no consistency. One of the things that APR has pushed for is if you have a recycling program, at a minimum, you need to take PET, high density, and polypropylene container. If you do that, at least we know we're getting the same volume and the same consistency, and you can build an infrastructure on it. But again, you're asking recyclers to create a business model where we're never sure what material is being collected, and we don't know what the market is at the end of the day because it's not required. So it's a very difficult business, but it works if we get the material and some consistency.
You mentioned some APR programs earlier that address a lot of these challenges that we're talking about. So markets are a challenge. Design is a challenge. Contamination. Let's walk through some of these programs that APR has that tackle these issues, including the APR Design Guide. We have a new APR Design Assessment tool coming out. We have a training program. We recently relaunched Recycling Demand Champions, and we also have a certification program. So tell us how some of these programs and resources address these challenges we're talking about today.
Well, thank you for that opportunity. I think the first and foremost, to understand that unlike many industries, the U.S. government does not have certain protocols relative to calling something recyclable or recycle ready or what have you. So the APR testing protocols to determine whether or not a new innovation or product is actually compatible with recycling are really the only tests relatively available across the industry and across the United States and beyond. So you can take your products to be tested to determine whether or not it complies with the APR design guide, which again is the gold standard to determine if something is in fact compatible with recycling. You pass the test, we recognize it, it's determined it's APR preferred. So companies can buy that material and they know that that material or that product is completely compatible with the recycling stream that we have in this country. The design guide is set up so that we actually train companies how to design their products so they're recyclable, or how to retrofit their products so they'll be recyclable. And we actually do customized training programs. So we'll go into a company, we'll look at their product mix, and we'll make a customized program just completely focused on that particular company and work with their packaging engineers and their brand managers so that they understand how to produce a product that ultimately is compatible with recycling and what products they're currently making that actually inhibit and contaminate the recycling stream. Because frankly, even with these types of programs, contamination still runs 20 to 25% of the stream that a recycler gets. So we're trying to reduce that. But if you can only imagine a world without the APR design guide and the testing protocols, contamination would be such high levels. I'm not sure there'd be plastics recycling as we know it and love it today. So I think, that's a huge deal. But in order to help companies, what we've done is we've designed an assessment tool, which will help companies run through a software program that they can input the components of their product that'll assess the recyclability of that product and point out where the problems are. It's going to be a huge product for consumer brand companies and for product manufacturers and container manufacturers. First time in North America that this is coming out. We're going to be rolling that over at the end of the first quarter this year. I mentioned the training program. The other thing that's very, very important is the big problem, as I mentioned earlier with recycling, is that it's the plastic products that consumers use every single day, the consumer products. That's the products that we're trying to get at with all this legislation and all the attention that's being focused on it. Because what we call post-industrial material, the business-to-business material, the shrink wrap, the stuff that is developed that stays behind the manufacturing sector, whatever, that material is pretty much already has a market in it and it's already taken care of. If you were to include that at the expense of using consumer plastic that is discarded, then you're actually diluting the impact of what we're trying to do from the plastics recycling system. So we have a certification program called APR PCR certification, which certifies in a chain of custody way that the material actually did come from consumer products. It's material that has been collected in consumer collection programs through state and local communities, either through curbside or drop-off or deposit programs, so that if someone's purchasing that material, they want to be certain that that material is actually post-consumer material, because that's what all the legislation is focused on. That's what all the regulation is focused on. It's not on post-industrial material. It's on post-consumer material. So our PCR certification program is aligned with ISO standards, ASTM standards, and what have you. It's a chain of custody program, and it is the gold standard that is out there in terms of certifying that your product actually comes from what consumers put in the bin. And that's what we're trying to get at. And our programs combined really are the cafeteria plan, if you will. If anybody follows our cafeteria plan, we know that their product will be recycled, it can be recycled, and ultimately they are using certified material as well. So those cafeteria programs are really sort of what everybody, if they follow those, we know their product actually is going to be classified as APR preferred and that it comes from consumer waste and it actually can be recycled again and again and again into a consumer product.
These are all great and helpful programs. And as I mentioned, we also recently relaunched our APR Recycling Demand Champions program. And we did go in depth on this program on our last podcast, but briefly tell us how this new program can really help boost markets for recycled plastics.
Well, the fact of the matter is that people's paradigms of what material can go back into is fairly narrow. There are huge markets for recycled material that don't need to be food grade. They don't need to be bottle to bottle. And what we're trying to do is expand people's paradigms in terms of potential market applications for material. Plastic pallets, last 10 to 12 years if you use recycled material in plastic pallets. You think of railroad ties, particularly in the Northeast, you have pressure tread railroad ties. You got to replace them every couple of years. You put a railroad tie down that's made with recycled plastic, almost like decking. That thing can last for 10, 12, 15 years, 20 years, huge cost savings, less maintenance, what have you. But then internally, you have recycling carts and you have what they call dunnage crates, internal manufacturing crates to move material around in a manufacturing facility. The opportunities, the universe of potential application is really infinite for using recycled plastic. And I think that people look at, well, it's going to be bottle to bottle. That's not true. And, the other thing is, food grade application, not every product needs material that meets FDA standards for food grade application. So the Demand Champions program is really about recognizing those companies that have expanded the market, if you will, by the utilization of recycled material into new product and new product development. And it's all about creating additional markets for material. And it's been extremely successful.
Lots of opportunities within that program. And as you mentioned, all different applications for recycled plastics out there. And there are other significant opportunities and areas for growth in plastic recycling today, from boosting collection to expanding markets, like you just mentioned, as well as strengthening infrastructure. What opportunities do you see as most important going into this next year and beyond? And how is APR positioning its strategy to support and accelerate that growth?
Well, it's really all about policy and levers. You have all EPR that's being out there and, everybody says EPR is great. Well, we look at things at EPR and we have to make sure that EPR is successful in achieving what ultimately it's supposed to achieve, which is creating markets and incentives to recycle more plastic and replace a lot of virgin material. Some of the initial regulations in terms of how they identify certain end markets are problematic. So the regulatory challenges as we attempt to do the right thing get very technical. So we have to focus on that with our policy levers. And then we have to focus on creating additional markets for material. APR has been talking about mandated recycled content requirements since 2006. And we've got a couple of states that have recognized that. They're about to go into effect. We need more of that, but not just requiring it, but we have to incentivize the use of it. So our whole focus in 26 is really going to be on market demand and how we can use policy to create that incentives so that the market wants to use more recycled plastic domestically produced, I might add. That's really got to be our focus. We deal with the technical challenges every day, but we need customers, and it all comes, how do we get more customers?
A lot of these topics will be covered at the upcoming Plastics Recycling Conference coming up in February in Chula Vista, California. So tell us a little bit about the conference and what should attendees expect to hear about while they're there?
So we're very excited about this year. We're very excited about what's coming up in Chula Vista. The Plastics Recycling Conference that we've been putting on for, 17 years or so has really grown into basically the largest plastics recycling conference, certainly in North America and one of the largest in the world. It's really become sort of a seminal event on the plastics recycling industry. And this year, particularly, we're excited because what we've done is we've incorporated two other conferences at the same time in the same location. But we're going to have not just the plastics recycling conference, we're also unveiling the resource recycling conference track at this conference, which historically has been a separate conference of its own. And it's focused on state and local recycling officials who come to the conference. They talk about recycling issues and challenges on their own right. They'll be able to participate in the plastics recycling conference. They'll be able to go to the exhibit hall, et cetera. And then, of course, we're repeating what we did last year, the Textile Recycling Recovery Summit, which was incredibly successful last year. It seems like textile recycling is growing. It's almost probably like the next big thing out there. And so we'll have that track as well. And so you have all these different components that are going to be there going forward. So that's really exciting. And then, of course, you've got the agenda for the Plastics Recycling Conference is focused on what does the plastic recycling industry need to continue to meet the challenges of plastic sustainability today, not about 10 years from now, not about 5 years from now. What do we need now? And frankly, this agenda has gone through some iterations even over the last couple of months as we've gotten it ready. So, we're going to obviously talking about California Senate Bill 54. We're going to have the director of Cal Recycle, Director Zoe Heller is going to be in a fireside chat with APR's Kate Bailey, the head of Circular Action Alliance, the big PRO that's involved with EPR legislation across the country. Jeff Falco will be on a chat with myself on a fireside chat. We're going to be talking about, obviously legislative activity, PCR mandates, how we're going to be compliant. But what are the other things that recyclers need? Procurement priorities, long-term contracts. How does EPR work? What does it mean for companies? What it means for recyclers? What it means for local recycling officials? Big focus this year, we're going to have the CSO from Rivian there talking about the automotive industry and beyond, because obviously the automotive industry is such a huge market demand for plastics and recycled plastics. There'll be some discussion on chemical recycling in transition. Chemical recycling came out about 5, 6, 7 years ago from a new terminology that they utilized with, a lot of enthusiasm and potential promises. And then there's been some sort of reality check. So where are we with chemical recycling? What's accurate? What does the future hold, et cetera? So we're going to be having a look at that as we go forward. Those are a lot of the things that are going to be on, but it's going to be focused on what do we need today and what policy levers do we need today. There'll be workshops. This isn't a lecture conference. This is a participatory conference. We'll have workshops for people to participate in. And already, I think we've already exceeded or very close to exceeding the sponsors and exhibitors that we had last year. We typically have about 2,400 people, and we expect we'll have at least that many this year in a brand new facility, just opened, right on the Pacific, just 8 miles south of San Diego in February. It's going to be a great event.
Sounds like a can't miss event. Again, like Steve said, that's in February in Chula Vista, California. Hope to see everybody who's listening today there. And if you are in any way involved in the recycling industry, you can't miss it. Finally, to wrap up today, Steve, as we head into 2026, what are you optimistic about? What are some of APR's goals for the new year?
First of all, when you look at it from an optimistic standpoint, there's never been more attention on the recyclability of plastics from a regulatory and a legislative standpoint than there is today. So now is our opportunity to address the fundamental structural challenges that we face. We have to take advantage of this opportunity to address the big challenge. And how do we deal with market demand? How do we deal with the importing of reduced price and subsidized material from overseas? How do we create incentives to use domestically based material? How do we create incentives to use more recycled material beyond just the stick of regulation? How do we provide tax incentives to utilize it? How do we provide reduction in EPR fees if you use domestically produced material? Those are the types of things that we're going to be going about. It's going to be markets throughout 2026. And I know it's redundant, but that's where we are right now.
Glad we could end on that optimistic note. We have a lot to focus on, a lot of work up ahead, but we can definitely face these challenges. And as Steve mentioned, lots of APR programs that address these things directly. And we will also have a session at PRC called Get to Know APR. We'll have the leads of those programs in the room that you can speak to directly. So it should be a great session. Any last comments before we wrap up today, Steve?
Well, I think that there seems to be, a lot of negative around plastics and recycling and a lot of the negative folks that got. But the fact of the matter is, our goal at APR is that within 3 to 5 years, every plastic product or package has some level of recycled content in it. We tend to focus on, from a regulatory standpoint, 25% here, 50% here, whatever. But it's a narrow tranche of products. But if you think about every product that's out there that can use recycled content, and if they use even just a small percentage of content, we would grow this market exponentially. Part of our goal is to try and expand the paradigm so as many products have component of recycled content as possibly can. The reality is, while there are some that want to ban plastics, we're always going to have plastic products. So the key to the sustainability of plastic products, frankly, begins and ends with recycling. So we have to make recycling work. And APR has set the base to be able to recycle products we do today and many more. So we're not going away, and plastics aren't going away. And if you recycle, you use less plastic. So you know what? Let's keep going. Let's keep optimistic, because long term, we're all going to have to be here. So thank you very much for the opportunity today.
Again, thanks to Steve for joining us today, and thanks to everyone for listening. For more information about APR, plastic recycling, and much more, visit the APR website at plasticsrecycling.org. Check us out on LinkedIn, Facebook, and X at APR Recycles. You can find recycled content wherever you get your podcasts. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to subscribe, rate, like, and review.
This podcast was recorded in the studios of
Policy Resolution Group, Washington, D.C.